The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday night, turning the streets into a maze of puddles and reflections from the neon signs. Inside Tony's diner, the smell of fresh coffee and grilled onions filled the air. The old jukebox in the corner was playing some classic rock tune, and the fluorescent lights gave everything that warm, familiar glow that made the place feel like home to so many people. Lisa had been wiping down tables for the past hour, getting ready for the evening rush that never really came on weeknights anymore. She'd been working at this diner for 3 years now, ever since she dropped out of college to help her mom pay the bills. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Plus, she genuinely liked the people who came in. There was old Mr. Peterson, who ordered the same breakfast every morning at 7 sharp, and Mrs. Chen, who always left a $5 tip even though her meal only cost $6. The diner was about half full that night. A couple of truck drivers sat at the counter talking about the weather and complaining about traffic. In one of the booths, a young mother was trying to keep her toddler from throwing French fries on the floor while she ate her burger. A few regulars were scattered around, nursing their coffee and reading newspapers or scrolling through their phones. That's when he walked in. The man pushed through the glass door slowly, like he was afraid someone might tell him to leave. His clothes were soaked through from the rain, and Lisa could see that his jacket had seen better days. Actually, it looked like it had seen better years. The fabric was worn thin in places, and there were patches of duct tape holding it together. His hair was gray and messy, sticking to his forehead from the rain, and his beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. Lisa noticed how he stood just inside the doorway for a moment, water dripping onto the black and white checkered floor. His eyes moved around the room, taking in all the customers, and she could see something in his expression that made her heart ache a little. It was like he was trying to decide if he belonged there or not. The other customers noticed him too. Lisa saw Mrs. Johnson, one of the regulars, lean over and whisper something to her husband. The truck drivers at the counter glanced over their shoulders and then quickly looked away. The young mother pulled her little boy closer to her side of the booth. It wasn't mean exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was that uncomfortable feeling people get when they see someone who's clearly struggling and don't know what to do about it. The man seemed to sense the attention. His shoulders hunched up a little, and he kept his eyes down as he slowly made his way toward the counter. Each step seemed to take effort, like walking through thick mud. Lisa could hear the squish of his wet shoes on the linoleum floor. When he reached the counter, he stood there for a moment, just breathing. Lisa could see his hands shaking as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small collection of crumpled bills and loose change. He spread it out on the counter carefully, like each penny mattered, which it probably did. "Excuse me, miss," he said, and his voice was so quiet Lisa had to lean forward to hear him. There was something polite about the way he spoke, like he'd been raised with good manners, but life had beaten him down. "I was wondering, how much would it cost for just a cup of coffee? And maybe, if you have any, just a piece of bread or a roll?" Lisa looked down at the money on the counter. There were a few dollar bills, some quarters, dimes, and nickels, and what looked like a lot of pennies. She did a quick count in her head and realized it was maybe enough for a small coffee, but definitely not enough for food, too. The man followed her gaze and quickly started gathering up the money. "I'm sorry," he said, even quieter than before. "I know it's not much, I just thought maybe—" He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. That's when Lisa really looked at him, really saw him. Under all the wet hair and worn clothes, she could see that he was probably younger than he looked. Maybe in his 50s, though the streets had aged him. His eyes were a light blue, and they were kind eyes, even though they looked tired and sad. There was something about him that reminded her of her own father, who had worked construction his whole life until his back gave out. But it was his hands that really got to her. They were shaking, but not just from the cold. She'd seen that kind of shaking before when her grandfather couldn't afford his medication. It was the shake of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in way too long. "You know what?" Lisa said, surprising herself with how quickly the words came out. "You look like you could use more than just coffee. Why don't you have a seat and I'll bring you something hot to eat?" The man looked up at her with confusion in his eyes. "Oh no, miss, I couldn't." I don't have enough money for a whole meal. I just wanted... But Lisa was already moving, grabbing a menu and walking around the counter. Don't worry about the money right now, she said, leading him toward an empty booth in the corner. Everyone deserves a warm meal on a night like this. As they walked to the booth, Lisa could feel the eyes of the other customers following them. She heard Mrs. Johnson make a disapproving clicking sound with her tongue. One of the truck drivers muttered something under his breath that she didn't quite catch, but from his tone, she could guess it wasn't supportive. Behind the counter, she saw Frank, the night manager, watching with a frown on his face. Frank was a good guy, but he was all about the bottom line. He'd been managing diners for 20 years and had seen every kind of scam and sob story. Lisa knew he wouldn't be happy about giving away free food, especially not to someone who looked like they might be what he called a professional beggar. But Lisa didn't care about any of that right now. All she could think about was how this man had asked so politely for so little, and how his hands were shaking, and how he reminded her of her dad. The man slid into the booth slowly, like his whole body hurt. Up close, Lisa could see that his clothes weren't just old and wet, they were also too big for him, like he'd lost a lot of weight recently. His jacket hung loose on his frame, and his jeans were bunched up at the waist where he'd tightened his belt. "What's your name?" Lisa asked as she set the menu down in front of him. "Robert," he said, still looking confused about why this young woman was being so nice to him. "But listen, miss, I really can't afford—" "I'm Lisa," she interrupted with a smile. "And like I said, don't worry about the money right now. Are you hungry?" Robert's eyes filled up with water, and for a moment Lisa thought he might start crying right there in the booth. Instead, he just nodded, not trusting his voice to speak. "Okay then," Lisa said. "I'll be right back with something good." As she walked back toward the kitchen, Lisa could feel the weight of all those stares on her back. She knew people were probably thinking she was naive or foolish, giving away food to some random homeless guy. But looking at Robert sitting there in that booth, trying to make himself as small as possible, she knew she was doing the right thing. Sometimes, she thought, being right was more important than being popular. Lisa walked into the kitchen with her heart pounding. She wasn't sure why she felt so nervous, but something about Robert sitting out there in that booth made her want to do everything just right. The kitchen was busy with the usual evening prep work. Carlos, the cook, was flipping burgers on the grill while Maria, the other waitress, was plating up an order for table 6. "Hey, Carlos," Lisa called out. "Can you make me a plate of the meatloaf special? The big portion?" Carlos looked up from the grill, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Sure thing, but who's it for? I didn't see any new orders come." And as Lisa hesitated for a second, she knew word would get around fast in a place this small. "It's for the gentleman who just came in, the one sitting in booth 4. Maria looked up from her plates. "You mean the homeless guy?" "Lisa, honey, does he even have money to pay for that?" "Don't worry about it," Lisa said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Just make it a good one, Carlos. Extra mashed potatoes, and throw in some of those dinner rolls, too." Carlos nodded and started working on the plate. He'd been cooking at Tony's for 8 years, and he'd seen Lisa grow from a shy teenager into the caring young woman she was now. He trusted her judgment, even when he didn't fully understand what she was doing. While Carlos prepared the food, Lisa grabbed a coffee pot and walked back out to Robert's booth. She could feel Frank's eyes on her as she poured the coffee into a clean white mug. Robert wrapped his hands around the warm cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered, taking a small sip. "I haven't had coffee this good in a long time." Lisa noticed that his hands had stopped shaking as much now that he was warming up. "Food will be ready in just a few minutes," she told him. "Carlos makes the best meatloaf in the city." Robert looked up at her with those kind blue eyes. "Miss Lisa, I need to be honest with you. I really can't pay for a whole meal. I've been counting my money for 2 days just to afford that coffee." "I don't want you to get in trouble with your boss." Lisa glanced over at Frank, who was definitely watching them now. She could see the concern on his face, but she also knew Frank had a good heart under all that business sense. "Let me worry about Frank," she said. "Right now I just want to make sure you get something to eat." At the table next to them, Mrs. Johnson was getting louder with her complaints. "I don't know what this place is coming to," she was saying to her husband. "First they let anyone walk in off the street, and now they're giving away free food. We pay good money to eat here." Her husband, who'd always been the quieter of the two, just nodded and kept eating his pie. But Lisa could see him glancing over at Robert with something that might have been sympathy. The truck drivers at the counter had a different take on things. "Good for her," one of them said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Takes guts to help someone when everyone else is just complaining about it." His partner nodded. "My brother was homeless for a while after he got back from Afghanistan. You never know what someone's story is." Lisa felt a little better hearing that support, but she could also see that not everyone agreed. A couple at table 2 had stopped eating and were whispering to each other while looking in Robert's direction. The young mother with the toddler seemed torn between wanting to help and wanting to protect her child from something she didn't understand. Carlos rang the bell in the kitchen window, and Lisa went to pick up Robert's plate. It looked amazing. The meatloaf was thick and covered in brown gravy. The mashed potatoes were piled high with butter melting on top, and there were bright green beans on the side. Carlos had even added 2 warm dinner rolls with little packets of butter and jelly. "Tell him it's on the house," Carlos said quietly as Lisa picked up the plate. "And if Frank gives you any trouble, send him to me." Lisa felt a wave of gratitude toward Carlos. It was good to know she wasn't alone in this. She carried the plate back to Robert's booth, setting it down in front of him, along with silverware wrapped in a napkin. Robert stared at the food for a long moment without saying anything. Then Lisa saw a tear roll down his cheek. "I'm sorry," he said, quickly wiping his face with his sleeve. It's been a while since someone was this kind to me." "Don't apologize," Lisa said, sliding into the booth across from him. "There's nothing wrong with being grateful." Robert picked up his fork with shaking hands and took a small bite of the meatloaf. His eyes closed for a moment, and Lisa could see the relief on his face. Then he started eating more steadily, but still carefully, like he was trying to make it last as long as possible. "This is really good," he said between bites. "I used to cook for my family. My wife made the best meatloaf, but this comes close." "You have a family?" Lisa asked gently. Robert's face changed, becoming sadder. "Had," he corrected. "My wife passed away 3 years ago, cancer, and my daughter, well, she lives across the country now. We don't really talk anymore." Lisa could hear the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry, that must be really hard." "It is," Robert admitted. "After Jenny died, I kind of fell apart. Lost my job, couldn't pay the rent. I've been on the streets for about 8 months now." As he talked, Lisa learned more about his story. Robert had been a warehouse supervisor for 15 years. He'd served in Vietnam when he was young, came home, got married, raised a daughter. He'd been living what most people would call a normal, quiet life until everything went wrong at once. "The hardest part," he said, taking a sip of coffee, "isn't being cold or hungry, though that's bad enough. It's how people look at you. Like you're not even human anymore, like you're something dangerous or disgusting." Lisa thought about how the other customers had reacted when Robert walked in. "Some people just don't understand," she said. "They're scared of what they don't know." "I get it," Robert said. "I probably would have been the same way before this happened to me. You think it could never happen to you until it does." Frank appeared at their table, and Lisa felt her stomach tighten. But instead of the lecture she was expecting, Frank just looked at Robert and said, "How's the food?" "It's wonderful," Robert replied. "Your cook knows what he's doing." Frank nodded. "Carlos has been with us for 8 years. He's good people." Then he looked at Lisa. "Can I see you for a minute?" Lisa followed Frank back toward the counter, expecting the worst. But Frank surprised her. "Look," he said quietly, "I can't have you giving away meals every night. This is a business, not a charity. But tonight is okay. Sometimes we all need a little help." Lisa felt relief wash over her. "Thank you, Frank. I'll pay for it myself if I need to." "No need," Frank said. But next time, just give me a heads up first, okay? When Lisa got back to the booth, Robert was finishing the last of his mashed potatoes. He'd eaten everything on the plate, including both dinner rolls. "That was the best meal I've had in months," he said. "I can't thank you enough." Lisa reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a to-go container she'd grabbed from the kitchen. Inside were 2 more rolls, some leftover roast beef, and a piece of apple pie. "For later," she said, setting it on the table. Robert's eyes filled up again. "Why are you doing this for me?" Lisa thought about it for a moment. "Because everyone deserves to be treated like they matter," she said finally. "And because I hope if I ever needed help, someone would do the same for me." Before Robert left, he pressed the crumpled bills from his pocket into Lisa's hand. "It's not much, but please take it. I need to pay something." Lisa looked at the money, then gently pushed it back toward him. "Keep it," she said. "But promise me something. When things get better for you, and they will, help someone else who needs it." Robert nodded, clutching the to-go container like it was made of gold. As he walked toward the door, several customers watched him go. The truck driver who'd spoken up earlier gave him a nod, and even Mrs. Johnson looked a little less disapproving than before. After Robert left, the diner felt different somehow. Quieter, but in a good way. Like something important had just happened, even if most people couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. The next evening started like any other Wednesday night at Tony's diner. Lisa was wiping down the coffee machine when she heard the familiar chime of the front door. She looked up expecting to see one of the regulars, but instead, 3 men in expensive suits walked in. They looked completely out of place in the humble diner, like they'd stepped out of a business magazine and into the wrong story. The first thing Lisa noticed was how perfectly pressed their clothes were. Not a wrinkle anywhere. The man in front wore a dark navy suit that probably cost more than Lisa made in 3 months. His gray hair was styled perfectly, and his shoes were so shiny they reflected the diner's fluorescent lights. The 2 men behind him were younger, maybe in their 30s, but dressed just as formally. The dinner rush was just winding down, and the diner was quieter than usual. Mrs. Chen was in her regular booth, reading a romance novel while sipping her decaf coffee. A couple of teenagers were sharing a plate of fries at the counter, probably making their allowance money stretch as far as possible. Carlos was cleaning the grill in the kitchen, and Frank was counting the register. The 3 men stood by the door for a moment, looking around like they were studying the place. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking for someone specific. The older man's eyes swept across the room before landing on her. He smiled and walked over to the counter where she was standing. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice had that smooth, confident tone that came from years of making important decisions. "Are you Lisa?" Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. How did this stranger know her name? She'd never seen any of these men before in her life. "Yes, I'm Lisa," she said carefully. "Can I help you with something?" "We'd like to speak with you if you have a few minutes," the man continued. "My name is David Hartwell, and these are my associates, Michael and Thomas. We're from Hartwell Industries." Lisa had heard of Hartwell Industries. It was one of those big companies that had office buildings downtown and sponsored the local baseball team, but she couldn't imagine why they'd want to talk to a diner waitress. "I'm working right now," she said. "Is this about something I did wrong?" David Hartwell's smile got warmer. "Quite the opposite, actually. But perhaps we could sit down? This might take a few minutes to explain." Frank appeared from behind the register, sensing something unusual was happening. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking at the 3 suits with suspicion. "Everything's fine," David assured him. "We just need to speak with Lisa about a business matter. Would it be possible for her to take a short break?" Frank looked confused but nodded. "Sure, Lisa, take 15 minutes. I'll cover the counter." Lisa led the 3 men to a corner booth, the same one where Robert had sat the night before. She couldn't help but think about the contrast between then and now. Yesterday, a homeless man in worn clothes had asked for the smallest kindness. Today, men who probably owned half the city wanted to talk to her about something mysterious. "Can I get you anything?" Lisa asked, falling back on her waitress training because she didn't know what else to do. Coffee would be great, David said. The other two men nodded in agreement. Lisa poured 3 cups of coffee and sat down across from them, her hands fidgeting with her order pad. So what's this about? I've never applied for any jobs at your company or anything like that. David took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down carefully. Lisa, what we're about to tell you might sound strange, but I need you to bear with us. Yesterday evening around 9 o'clock you served a homeless man named Robert. Do you remember that? Lisa's heart started beating faster. How could they possibly know about Robert? Yes, I remember. But how do you know about that? Michael, one of the younger men, spoke up for the first time. We know because we've been watching. The words sent a chill through Lisa. Watching? What do you mean watching? David held up his hand to calm her fears. Nothing sinister, I promise. Let me explain from the beginning. For the past 6 months, our company has been conducting what we call a character study. We've been looking for someone very specific. Someone with particular qualities that can't be taught in school or learned from a book. Lisa stared at them, trying to process what she was hearing. You've been watching me? Not just you, Thomas, the third man, clarified. We've been observing dozens of people throughout the city. Business owners, teachers, store clerks, police, officers, nurses. Anyone who interacts with the public on a regular basis. David continued the explanation. You see, our company is starting a new division focused on community outreach and charitable giving. But we've learned from experience that these kinds of programs often fail because they're run by people who understand business, but don't understand real human need. Lisa was still confused. But what does this have to do with me and Robert? Everything, David said, leaning forward slightly. We hired a private investigation firm to help us identify individuals who demonstrate genuine compassion without any expectation of reward or recognition. They've been quietly documenting acts of kindness throughout the city. Michael pulled out a tablet and showed Lisa a photo. It was a picture of her and Robert sitting in this exact booth the night before. Someone had taken it from across the street, through the diner's front window. In the photo, Lisa was listening to Robert with genuine interest while he ate his meal. Our investigator was positioned across the street when Robert entered the diner, Michael explained. He witnessed the entire interaction, how you served him a full meal when he could only afford coffee, how you sat with him and treated him like a human being when other customers were uncomfortable, how you gave him extra food to take with him. Lisa felt exposed and a little angry. You had someone spying on me? Taking pictures without my permission? I understand your concern, David said quickly, and I apologize for the intrusion. But what we observed was remarkable. In 6 months of watching, we've seen countless acts of basic human decency. People holding doors, saying please and thank you, helping someone pick up dropped groceries. But what you did was different. Thomas opened a folder and pulled out a report. According to our investigator's notes, you didn't just help Robert. You dignified him. You made him feel like a valued customer rather than a charity case. You listened to his story without judgment. And when other customers were making comments, you ignored them and focused on doing what you felt was right. Lisa looked around the diner. Mrs. Chen was still reading her book, and the teenagers were now sharing a milkshake. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. I still don't understand what you want from me. David set down his coffee cup and looked directly at her. We want to offer you a job, Lisa. A very important job. Doing what? Running. Our new Community Impact Foundation, David said. We're starting with a budget of $2 million annually to help individuals and families in crisis throughout the city. But we need someone to lead it who understands what real need looks like and who has the heart to help without getting lost in bureaucracy. Lisa felt like the room was spinning. $2 million? I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about running a foundation or managing that kind of money. Michael smiled. But you know how to see Robert as a person instead of a problem. You know how to act on compassion without calculating the cost. Those are the skills we need most. We can teach you the business side, Thomas added. Budgets, reporting, legal requirements. But we can't teach someone to care the way you do. That's something you either have or you don't. Lisa thought about her life. 3 years of serving coffee and taking orders, living paycheck to paycheck, watching her dreams of college fade further away each month. And now these strangers were offering her something that sounded too good to be true. "Why me?" she asked. "There must be other people who help homeless people, social workers, volunteers at shelters." "There are," David agreed, "and many of them do wonderful work. But most of them are already part of existing systems. We need someone who acts on pure instinct, someone who helps because it's the right thing to do, not because it's their job." He paused and looked around the diner. "Besides, your approach was unique. You didn't just give Robert food and send him on his way. You gave him dignity. You made him feel like he mattered. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." Lisa's mind was racing. "What happened to Robert? Is he okay?" David smiled. "That's another reason we're here. We found Robert this morning. He's been staying at a shelter downtown. We've offered him a job in our building maintenance department and helped him get into transitional housing. He starts work on Monday." "You helped him?" Lisa felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "He told us about you," Michael said. "About how you treated him with respect when everyone else made him feel invisible. He said you gave him hope that there were still good people in the world." Thomas leaned forward. "Lisa, we're not asking you to decide right now. This is a big decision that will change your life completely, but we wanted you to know that your kindness toward Robert has started something much bigger than you realize." David reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Take some time to think about it. Talk to your family, your friends, whoever you trust. The offer will remain open." As the 3 men stood up to leave, David turned back to Lisa one more time. "You know what impressed our investigator the most? It wasn't just that you helped Robert. It was that you never looked around to see if anyone was watching. You never tried to get credit or recognition. You just did what felt right." After they left, Lisa sat alone in the booth, staring at the business card in her hands. Through the window, she could see the 3 men getting into a black car that probably cost more than her apartment rent for a year. Frank came over with the coffee pot. What was that all about? Lisa looked up at him, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "I think," she said slowly, "my life just completely changed." Lisa stared at the business card for what felt like hours after the 3 men left. The elegant black lettering seemed to shine under the diner's fluorescent lights. David Hartwell, CEO, Hartwell Industries. Below that was a phone number and an address downtown in one of those gleaming office towers she'd only seen from the outside. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She poured coffee without really seeing the cups, took orders without really hearing the words, and cleaned tables while her mind raced with questions and possibilities. Every few minutes, she'd touch the business card in her apron pocket just to make sure it was real. When closing time finally came, Lisa helped Carlos clean the kitchen while Frank counted the register. Everything felt different now, like she was seeing her life from the outside for the first time. The worn linoleum floors, the cracked vinyl booth seats, the ancient coffee machine that needed to be kicked sometimes to work properly. Was this really going to be her world forever, or had something incredible just happened? "You've been quiet tonight," Carlos observed as he wiped down the grill. "Those fancy guys got you thinking about something?" Lisa nodded, but didn't know how to explain what she was thinking about. How do you tell someone that strangers just offered you a completely different life because you bought a homeless man dinner? The drive home to her small apartment gave her time to think. She lived in a neighborhood where the houses were small and close together, where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Her mother's house was just 3 blocks away, and Lisa had been planning to stop by after work like she did most nights. Maria Rodriguez had raised Lisa by herself after Lisa's father died in a construction accident when Lisa was 15. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, cleaning offices in the morning and stocking shelves at a grocery store at night. When Lisa dropped out of college to help with the bills, her mother had cried for 3 days, not because she was disappointed, but because she felt like she'd failed her daughter. Lisa found her mother in the kitchen, paying bills at the small table where they'd eaten breakfast together for years. The light overhead flickered the way it had been doing for months, but they kept putting off calling an electrician because it cost money they didn't have. "How was work, Mija?" her mother asked, looking up from a stack of envelopes. Lisa sat down across from her and pulled out the business card. "Mom, something really strange happened today. I need to tell you about it, but I'm not sure you're going to believe me." For the next hour, Lisa told her mother everything. About Robert and the meal, about the 3 men in suits, about the job offer that seemed too good to be true. Her mother listened without interrupting, but Lisa could see the expressions changing on her face. Confusion, disbelief, worry, and finally something that might have been hope. $2 million? Her mother repeated when Lisa finished. "They want you to be in charge of $2 million? That's what they said. But Mom, I don't know anything about running a foundation. I've never even balanced a checkbook bigger than my own. What if I mess it up?" Maria reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. "Lisa, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you found that injured bird in our backyard?" Lisa smiled at the memory. "You said we couldn't afford a vet bill. And what did you do?" "I researched how to help it myself. I fed it with an eyedropper every 2 hours for 3 weeks until it could fly again." "You didn't know anything about taking care of birds," her mother pointed out. "But you learned because you cared. That's what these people saw in you, Mija. They saw someone who cares enough to learn." That night, Lisa barely slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if she took the job and couldn't handle it? What if she made bad decisions with all that money? What if she let down people who were counting on her? Help? But then she thought about Robert and how his face had changed when she sat down to talk with him instead of just dropping off his food and walking away. She thought about all the other people out there who might be invisible to everyone else but who deserved to be seen and helped. The next morning, Lisa called in sick to work. She needed time to think, and she needed to see something for herself. She took the bus downtown to the address on David Hartwell's business card. The Hartwell Industries building was 40 stories of glass and steel, reaching up into the gray morning sky like a monument to success. Lisa stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching people in expensive clothes hurry in and out of the revolving doors. She tried to imagine herself working in a place like that, making decisions that affected thousands of people's lives. It seemed impossible. A security guard noticed her standing there and crossed the street. "Can I help you with something, miss?" "I'm supposed to meet with David Hartwell," Lisa said, showing him the business card. "But I'm not sure I belong here." The guard, whose name tag read William, looked at the card and then at Lisa. "Mr. Hartwell is expecting you." "Well, not today specifically. He said to call when I was ready to talk." William smiled. "You know what? I've been working security in this building for 12 years. I've seen thousands of people walk through those doors. Some of them act like they own the world, but they don't care about anybody but themselves. You want to know who belongs here? People who care about other people. That's what makes a real difference." Lisa felt a little better hearing that. She thanked William and walked to a nearby coffee shop to think some more. As she sat by the window, with a cup of coffee she could barely afford, she watched the city waking up around her, business people rushing to meetings, construction workers starting their day, homeless individuals trying to find a warm place to sit. She thought about her conversation with her mother the night before, about how she'd never been afraid to learn new things when they mattered, about how caring enough was sometimes more important than knowing everything from the start. Around noon, Lisa made her decision. She found a payphone and dialed the number on the business card. David Hartwell's assistant answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hartwell's office, this is Patricia speaking." "Hi, this is Lisa Martinez. Mr. Hartwell asked me to call when I was ready to discuss his job offer." "Of course. Mr. Hartwell has been hoping to hear from you. Can you hold for just a moment?" David Hartwell came on the line almost immediately. "Lisa, I'm so glad you called. Have you had time to think about our conversation?" "I have," Lisa said, her heart pounding. And I have some questions. Of course. Would you like to come in and talk? We could meet this afternoon if that works for you. Lisa looked down at her jeans and simple sweater. I'm not really dressed for a business meeting. David chuckled. Lisa, if we cared about what people wore, we would have offered this job to someone in a suit. Can you be here in an hour? An hour later, Lisa found herself in an elevator climbing to the 38th floor. The elevator was so quiet and smooth that she could barely tell it was moving. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a movie. Everything was polished wood and soft lighting, with paintings on the walls that probably cost more than her apartment rent. Patricia, the assistant, greeted her warmly and led her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. David, Michael, and Thomas were already there, along with a woman Lisa hadn't met before. Lisa, thank you for coming, David said, standing up to shake her hand. I'd like you to meet Rebecca Chen, our head of human resources. Rebecca smiled and shook Lisa's hand. It's wonderful to meet you. David has told me so much about you. They all sat down at the large conference table, and Lisa felt very small in the big leather chair. But then David started talking and she began to feel more comfortable. Lisa, we want to be completely transparent with you about what this job would involve, he began. You would be the director of our Community Impact Foundation. Your job would be to identify people and families in need throughout the city and find ways to help them. Rebecca opened a folder and pulled out some papers. The position comes with a salary of $85,000 per year, plus full health benefits and a retirement plan. You'd have an assistant to help with paperwork and scheduling, and a budget of $2 million annually to distribute to people in need. Lisa's head was spinning. $85,000 was more than 4 times what she made at the diner. But how would I know how to help people? How would I decide who gets help and who doesn't? Michael leaned forward. That's exactly why we want you for this job. You would make those decisions the same way you decided to help Robert, by listening to people, by treating them with dignity, by using your heart as much as your head. Thomas added, we'd provide training on the legal and financial aspects, but the most important part, the human part, you already know how to do. David pulled out another folder. We've already identified our first case for you to consider. There's a single mother named Angela, who works 2 jobs but still can't afford her son's medical treatments. Her story is a lot like yours, actually. She's been struggling to keep her family together despite impossible circumstances. Lisa looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. What if I make mistakes? What if I give money to the wrong people? Or miss someone who really needs help? You will make mistakes, David said honestly. Everyone does. But the difference between making mistakes because you care too much and making mistakes because you don't care at all is huge. We'd rather have someone who occasionally helps the wrong person than someone who turns away the right person. Rebecca spoke up. Lisa, can I ask you something? When you helped Robert, did you worry about whether he deserved it? Lisa thought about that for a moment. No, I just saw someone who was hungry and cold. Exactly, Rebecca said. That's the approach we want for this foundation. Help first, ask questions later. Lisa looked around the conference room at the 4 successful people who were offering to trust her with something so important. It still felt surreal, but it also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. If I took this job, she said slowly, could I still help Robert? Could that be part of what I do? David smiled. Robert would love that. In fact, we were hoping you might want to work with him as an advisor. He has insights about homelessness and poverty that could make our programs more effective. Lisa felt a warmth spreading through her chest. The idea of working with Robert, of turning their brief connection into something that could help many more people, felt like the missing piece of a puzzle she didn't know she was solving. I have one more question, Lisa said. Can I start on Monday? 6 months later, Lisa sat in her new office on the 22nd floor of the Hartwell building, looking out at the city she was helping to change. The office still felt surreal sometimes. She had a desk made of real wood, a computer that didn't freeze every 10 minutes, and a view that stretched for miles. But the best part wasn't any of those things. The best part was the stack of thank you letters on her desk from people whose lives had gotten a little bit better. Her assistant, Jenny, knocked on the door and peeked in. "Lisa, Robert is here for your 2 o'clock meeting." And Angela called, "To say thank you again for helping with her son's surgery." Lisa smiled. Angela had been her first case, just like David had promised. A single mother working 2 jobs while her 8-year-old son needed heart surgery they couldn't afford. Lisa had learned how to navigate the insurance system, coordinate with hospitals, and cut through red tape to make sure the little boy got the treatment he needed. The surgery had been successful, and now Angela was back to working just one job, because she didn't have to worry about crushing medical bills anymore. "Send Robert in," Lisa said. "And Jenny, could you pull the files for the Williams family? I want to review their case before my 3 o'clock. Robert walked into the office, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that fit him properly. He'd gained some healthy weight over the past few months, and his eyes were brighter than they'd been that rainy night in the diner. He was carrying a folder full of papers and had the satisfied look of someone who'd accomplished something important. "How did the site visit go?" Lisa asked as Robert sat down in the chair across from her desk. "Better than I hoped," Robert said, opening his folder. "I spent 3 hours at the downtown shelter talking to folks about what they really need. The director was surprised to see someone from a foundation actually sitting down and listening instead of just writing checks and walking away." Lisa had learned early on that Robert's insights were invaluable. He understood the system from the inside in ways that no social work textbook could teach. When they were designing programs, he could spot problems and suggest solutions that might never occur to someone who'd never been homeless. "What did you find out?" Lisa asked, pulling out a notepad. "The shelter has plenty of beds and hot meals," Robert explained. "But what people really need is help getting identification documents replaced. You can't get a job without ID, but you can't get ID without an address, and you can't get an address without a job. It's a cycle that keeps people stuck." Lisa wrote down notes as Robert talked. This was exactly the kind of practical problem-solving that made their foundation different from others. Instead of assuming they knew what people needed, they asked, and then listened to the answers. "I talked to a woman named Dorothy who's been trying to replace her driver's license for 4 months, Robert continued. "She lost everything in a fire, including all her documents. The DMV wants a birth certificate, but she was born in another state and doesn't have money for the fees and paperwork. Without ID, she can't work. Without work, she can't afford the fees. She's trapped." "How much would it cost to help people get their documents replaced?" Lisa asked. Robert pulled out a calculator and showed her some figures he'd worked out. For 50 people, maybe $3,000 total, but those 50 people could get jobs and start rebuilding their lives. Lisa looked at the numbers. $3,000 was nothing compared to their overall budget, but for 50 people it could mean the difference between staying trapped in the system and finding a way out. "Let's do it," she said. "Can you work with Jenny to set up a program? Maybe we could have volunteers help people navigate the paperwork." Robert grinned. "Already ahead of you. I talked to some folks at the community college who need volunteer hours for their social work program. They'd love to help with something like this." This was how most of their conversations went. Robert would identify a problem that others missed. Lisa would figure out how to fund a solution, and together they'd find ways to make it happen that didn't just throw money at the issue but actually solved it. Lisa's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the article in the newspaper about the veteran housing program. So proud of you, Mija." The newspaper article had been a surprise. Lisa hadn't expected anyone to pay attention to their work, but a reporter had somehow heard about their program to help homeless veterans find permanent housing. The article had led to calls from other cities wanting to know how to start similar programs. "Robert, did you see the article about our veteran housing program?" Lisa asked. "I did," he said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "You know what the best part was? They quoted 3 different veterans who said the program saved their lives. That's not about money or statistics. That's about people." Lisa thought about how much had changed since that night in the diner. She'd helped over 200 families in 6 months. Kids were getting medical treatment they needed. Families were staying in their homes instead of losing them to medical bills or job loss. Elderly people were getting help with groceries and utilities so they didn't have to choose between food and medicine. But the changes weren't just in the community. Lisa had changed too. She'd learned to read financial reports, manage budgets, and work with lawyers and accountants. She'd discovered she was good at seeing patterns and connecting resources with needs. Most importantly, she'd learned that caring about people wasn't enough by itself, but when combined with resources and determination, it could move mountains. "I have something to show you," Robert said, pulling out a letter from his folder. This came to the shelter addressed to us. Lisa took the letter and read it aloud. "Dear Robert and Lisa, my name is Kevin and I was homeless for 2 years before your document replacement program helped me get my ID back. I got a job 3 weeks later and I just signed a lease on my first apartment. I wanted you to know that when I got my first paycheck, I put $20 in an envelope to help the next person who needs their documents replaced. It's not much, but it's what I can give right now. Thank you for seeing me as a person instead of a problem." Lisa felt tears starting in her eyes. This was what made all the late nights and difficult conversations worth it. Not just helping people, but helping them in a way that let them help others. "There's more," Robert said, smiling. "Kevin isn't the only one. We've gotten donations from 12 different people we've helped. Small amounts, but they wanted to contribute. And 3 people have volunteered to help with intake interviews because they remember what it felt like to need help." Lisa leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there, Dorothy was probably working at her new job because she'd been able to get her ID replaced. Angela's son was playing with his friends because his heart was healthy. Kevin was coming home to his own apartment for the first time in years. "You know what I realized?" Lisa said to Robert. "That night at the diner when I brought you dinner, I thought I was just helping one person. I had no idea it would lead to all this." Robert nodded. "That's the thing about kindness. You never know where it's going to end up, but it always ends up somewhere good." Jenny knocked on the door again. "Lisa, you have that city council meeting in an hour about expanding the program citywide, and Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story about the foundation's impact." Lisa gathered her papers and prepared to head to another meeting where she'd talk to important people about helping vulnerable people. It still amazed her sometimes that these were the problems she got to solve now. As she walked toward the elevator with Robert, she thought about Frank and Carlos back at Tony's diner. She still visited them regularly, and they always asked about her work with a mixture of pride and amazement. Frank had started a small program at the diner where customers could buy meals for homeless individuals, inspired by what he'd witnessed that night. "Robert," Lisa said as they waited for the elevator, "do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't been working that night? Or if you hadn't decided to come into the diner?" Robert thought about it for a moment. "I think kindness finds a way," he said finally. "Maybe it would have been different circumstances, but I believe good people and people who need help find each other somehow. The universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time." The elevator doors opened, and as they rode down together, Lisa reflected on the truth of what Robert had said. She'd thought she was just a waitress doing a small good deed, but maybe she'd actually been preparing her whole life for this moment, for this opportunity to help people on a scale she'd never imagined. The doors opened on the ground floor, and Lisa stepped out into the lobby of the building where she now worked, where she made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, where she'd learned that caring about people could actually be a career. As she walked toward her next meeting, she smiled, thinking about the homeless man who'd shuffled into a diner 6 months ago and changed everything. Sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary Tuesday nights, and sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities begin with the simple decision to treat another human being with dignity and kindness. The ripples from that one act of compassion were still spreading, touching lives in ways Lisa was only beginning to understand. And somehow, she knew this was just the beginning.